So, what does the news look like now? Where do we get our news? How do people get their news? And the caveat is, FYI, 54% of tablet news consumers also read news on their smartphones. 1/4 of the tablet news readers get all news on 4 devices: a tablet, a smartphone, a laptop, a desktop. And findings show that users who read news on multiple devices spend more time consuming news overall. So, there's a lot of news consumers out there, but how do you capture them? So what does news look like now? And I'm going to start with the Adobe guy. What does it look like, Steve?
Well, I think that, for us, obviously I'm the technology geek. So, I look at it from the aspect of what can I do to make technology that, A, allows you to capture and produce it, and then B, how do you get it to the widest audience possible? Mm-hmm. I think the interesting things for us were, how did, we have an editor called Premiere Pro, if anybody does editing. That's one of our primary products. But it's, it was a distant third, fourth in the market just a few years ago. And we worked really hard to get it up to speed, but the primary reason why we focused on that, and news and sports actually were the primary vehicles that we attacked, and it was specifically because we wanted to be able to deal with any format known to man. And any format known to man meant that, basically you could take it in from, whether it was coming from an ARRI or a RED or something like that, or you could bring it in from an iPhone, and it would just play. Mm-hmm. So the difference was, how could we shape that so that anybody could get it out into a different distribution format and all that kind of thing. But the requirement that we saw from our primary customers was speed, 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 and then if you can do anything better, do more speed. So, we really focused on that bent. How can we get content out from going into, turning it into a story that somewhat makes sense, and then get it out to a broad mass? How that's, just from an observational point of view, we've seen the story change quite dramatically as a result. The story, when you have traditional big broadcaster or publisher moving into broadcast, or small organizations just starting from day one, they're doing interesting things with taking technology to distribute it as fast and wide as possible. And what is the differentiation between the two? And one of the things that I look at on the technology side is the quality of media that we've been able to put out has now basically created an even playing field for a whole disparate number of people to be able to do interesting things with it. And that doesn't mean that just because you had the kit or the distribution vehicle makes you different, or that you had some advantage over somebody else. And I guess, one of the things that I look at in terms of distribution is, anybody here know Bethany Moda? Yep. Raise your hand if you said Bethany Moda. 2 over there. Just as an aside, she's on YouTube. And she gets about 7 million viewers a week to her video. And she's doing just some really interesting things to publish that fast, creating content, obviously, to a very specific audience, and then reaching out via social media to bring more people back to the original content that she places on YouTube. And that's really interesting to me, because that changes, her story is obviously very specific to a specific audience, but the way she's using technology and shaping her story is something that I kind of see correlates from a news perspective into how the story's changed as a result, and then the audience it reaches. It's
sort of a reverse flow,
right?
The usual way. And probably a good question. That's a good question for Dax, since you are in news, right? Mm-hmm. How do you see news? What is news? What does it look like today?
I think it's a lot more perspective-based than ever before. When I left NBC to go help start Fusion, one of the things that was made very clear to me from my bosses at Univision and ABC is that if you're creating content that can live on our networks, you're not doing your job. These 2 behemoths of media companies wanted to start a network that looked very different from what they were doing, because they understood that the future and the fastest growing audience, which was the Latino millennial, was very accepting of points of view and attitudes and perspectives and opinions, and that was okay. And so the show that I do on Fusion with Jorge Ramos, who has been in the anchor chair for longer than Walter Cronkite, more than 30 years. He's been doing the 6:30 news for Univision. We've done a show that tries to look at issues that, I know it's a trite expression, but it's the underdog, the voice for the voiceless. And so the stories that have had the most resonance for us have been the ones that don't get covered as much. The story right now actively in Mexico of the 43 missing students that has not nearly as much coverage as it should in the American media landscape. We've been down there doing that. When the Venezuela protests were going on for the beginning of SOS Venezuela, we went down and did that. Hong Kong got a lot of coverage, but we went out there and did that. And then along the way, when we put Jorge out in the field, you know, some people here may have seen him, and we had Jorge swim the Rio Grande. And we got a lot of flack for that from people who said that he was making himself a part of the story and that it was showboating. But the fact that people were talking about the issues of what these children are dealing with as they struggle to get to the United States, and kind of showing the dangers that they face, inserting yourself into the story a little bit more, pushing the envelope, having a sensibility, isn't a bad thing anymore. And that's what our mandate has been from, you know, one of the big three networks. So that's what I think. It's ironic that one of the big three and one of the icons of the traditional news sensibility said, we want to pour a lot of money into this because we think the future is actually very different from what we've been doing for 50 years. And that's what we're trying to do. We're experimenting.
And it is very different. And you're right about putting yourself in the story. It's not that you're showboating, but if you get people to talk about the issue, because there are so many different platforms, right, that you have to break through in some way, and you have to make it interesting so that people want to watch. And that video of him swimming the Rio Grande, that will live everywhere. And people, I find that we have a big audience on CNN, but I find people watching my stories or commenting or walking up to me in the Whole Foods or when I'm getting coffee saying, I saw your post on Facebook about this, and it's usually about something that ran on CNN. But then I had a conversation about it on Facebook, and that's where they will tune in, or on Twitter, or on some other platform, and that's where they will tune in, which I find very interesting. Talk to me about that, Matt Silverman. What's going on?
I think you hit it on the head. What's the first thing that you guys look at when you wake up in the morning? Is it Facebook?
Can I just say this? Last night I found myself, I had the big TV on in my room, right? And I don't even know what channel, and I'm going through my phone, and I'm like, why am I watching video on my phone while it's television?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to the question of what does the news look like, I'm so fascinated, and I love talking about this idea that news is, the consumption of news is not about a publication. I don't know that a lot of folks read a website or a newspaper from top to bottom the way that we used to. I don't know that we go to certain networks or channels the way we used to. I think we're living every single minute on platforms like Facebook, like Instagram, like Tumblr, Reddit. And those platforms are full of content from outside of those ecosystems. So yes, you're plugging into Facebook to see what your friends are doing, but you're also subscribed to media organizations. You're subscribed to pages that are, curating other stuff that's tailored to your interests. I get asked a lot, what is Mashable's audience? And I used to know the answer to that pretty well, and now the landscape has changed so radically that when we create content, I try to instill in my team, like, we're making content for the internet, and we're also making content for subsections of the internet, communities that live in certain pockets of the internet, because things can go viral, but not in the viral way that you think about them, where everyone is talking about the same thing. It can go viral in a tiny little sub-community of Tumblr that's really obsessed with Doctor Who. Right. So if you break a story about, an entertainment story about Doctor Who, and all of these Tumblr guys and girls are reblogging that, then you've succeeded, and hopefully you've driven traffic back to your website, because that's where you're going to monetize. But guess what? Like, in 5 years, I'm not even sure that websites are going to be a thing, and that freaks us out. I think it freaks consumers out.
Why?
They will still be a thing, but more and more we're seeing consumption on the networks. So Facebook scares the crap out of me because you know, what I do is make YouTube content, and Facebook just launched it, or not just launched, but is going hard on their video strategy, and so I'm killing myself to make YouTube content, and we upload one thing to our Facebook audience where we have a ton of engagement, and it gets like 200,000 views.
Isn't that amazing?
And
Yep.
you know, what is a view? Well, if someone flicks by and I was like, oh, what's that? Okay, on to the next thing. Well, that's a view, but are they really consuming the content? Are they getting value out of it? These are the issues that we're wrestling with. They're not what should we make, but how should we make it for this platform? And there's no rules. We're a digital first media company. So I have different struggles, I think, than some of my colleagues on this panel, but it's no less hard figuring out what the heck the internet wants and how to package it. It's what we struggle with.
So you think websites you think it's going to mostly be sites like social media sites, like Facebook and Twitter?
I think so, and it scares media people because we don't want to. I don't want to speak for all of my colleagues up here, but we don't want to hand control over to networks. We don't want our content to live exclusively on networks that we don't control, because the flick of an algorithm switch on Facebook or YouTube means one day you're up and the next day you're down, and you're doing the same stuff, but you have no idea why it's not resonating anymore, and it's so frustrating. So on one hand, you can't not play. You have to get in the game, and you have to speak the language of these networks, and on the other side, we're scared out of our mind. We're trying to figure it out.
It's so weird how it's changing, because we used to want to control our content so much on CNN. And I remember I got in trouble at CNN for uploading a video at Michael Jackson's funeral. It was me and Meredith Vieira. And I'm like, look, we're here at Michael Jackson's funeral. And I uploaded it, and CNN's like, what are you doing? And now they want you, they're like, yeah, send your stuff out. Yep. Tweet it out, and I had to go in front of like standards and practices to say you should not be uploading CNN content, because and now the whole model has shifted. It's really, really odd.
And I would say that I bet there are a lot of your viewers who are more interested in getting information from you as Don rather than CNN as a company. Yeah. And that's the difference. Yeah. And to Steve's point about Bethany, it's like she's commanding a huge audience that we wish we could tap into, and we're trying to figure it out.
And it's interesting because Google is now spending, I think, over $200 million to then rebrand YouTube on top of the brand that Bethany Mota and others have made.
Yes.
Which is interesting.
If you guys are in New York and you've seen the advertisements for YouTube about these big channels, and some of them are personalities and some of them are media companies, and it's like 7 million subscribers, and I'm talking to colleagues at work like, who are these advertisements for? And he's like, they're for ad agencies, because Google is trying to legitimize this platform.
Who is the woman that does the butt? She does squats everywhere, and she's got millions and millions of followers on. What's her name? Jen Selter. She's a media mogul just for her butt, for like on Instagram.
Well, the funny thing with Bethany Mota is she has a clothing line at Aeropostale. She has like a home furnishing, bedspreads and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, she started when she was 14 years old on her iPhone.
Right.
Putting stuff up to YouTube, but at the same time, she's 18 now.
Right. So kids come in and they ask me all the time, like, what should I do? Give me some advice. How do I start? Should I go to a small market? And I say, you know what? That was so like 5 years ago. I can't really tell you how to do it. If you have this phone or some sort of device, portable device, you can be your own network if you do it properly. If you do something unique.